Good morning, everybody. I'm Mac Taylor, Legislative Analyst, and a short while ago my office released our overview of the governor's budget, the 12-13 fiscal year. This is a document that we put out every year, and it really serves a couple of purposes. I think, first of all, when you get the governor's budget, there's an awful lot going on, and it's a little bit hard to digest. So we hope that this is a more convenient way to absorb what the budget is about from a higher level. And we also, of course, comment on several of the governor's major proposals and give our initial reactions to it. And we hope that helps the legislature in their initial planning stages as they consider how they're going to deal with the budget for the coming fiscal year. When we were here a couple of months ago talking about our fiscal outlook, we talked about how much progress had been made in the current fiscal year, dropping our operating deficits from roughly $20 billion a year to less than half of that. And even those were declining over our fiscal forecast period. Under the governor's budget proposal, their estimates of the underlying problem over time are even smaller, largely because of they have different revenue numbers, higher revenue numbers than us. But I think it's safe to say that if you adopt the governor's, if the legislature were to adopt the governor's proposal and accept his revenue numbers, you would in fact address the budgetary problem not only in the coming fiscal year, but for the next several years. So I think it is a good thing that the governor has fundamentally addressed that problem that we've been dealing with for the last several years. Now, our revenue perspective is a little bit different, and I want to spend a few minutes talking about that. Some of you probably read about the difference in finance and our numbers with regards to the governor's tax proposal that they hope will be on the ballot in November. And the same issues that we had on the incremental revenues from that measure also apply to our revenue basis. We have not done a grounds-up revenue forecast like we did in November. We hope to do that in February. But because we really don't see dramatic changes in our underlying economics or revenue cash flow since November, we did provide a comparison in the report with the governor's proposed revenues and our November numbers. And what that shows is that the governor's roughly $4 billion higher than us, and this is just on baseline revenues before his tax proposal measure. He's $4 billion higher than we were in November. Almost all of the difference is in the personal income tax, and we think that the most significant reason for the difference in those personal income tax revenue estimates is due to capital gains. We have a chart in there that shows historical net capital gains to California and finances forecast compared with ours. And I think what we're concerned about is that the capital gains assumptions that the administration is making is a little bit optimistic, and that can generate a lot more money. We've looked historically, we've considered what is happening in housing, which is fairly stagnant. We've looked at our projections of where we think the market will be, and we do get considerably lower numbers from capital gains. And that really explains much of the difference in those numbers. At this time, we're really not asking the legislature to do anything in particular about it. That's a little bit more, I think, waving the cautionary yellow flag that there is, in our view, more downside risk to the administration's numbers. But they could be right. We're going to know a lot more after about 2 weeks, because we'll have all of the information on the estimated payments that people make on their personal income taxes that were due January 15th. So towards the end of this month, we'll have a much better indication of where we are in the current year and the implications for the out year. So I think what we would do is suggest the legislature just kind of hang on a bit, wait for our forecast in February, and see where we are there and go from there. Let me just make a couple other comments about some of the proposals, the major proposals in the governor's budget. And let's start with Proposition 98. The governor has some fairly dramatic restructuring proposals on the way that we fund schools, our categorical programs, and state mandates. And in every case, we think that there is a lot of merit to the governor's proposals. These are things that address issues we've raised in the past about school district flexibility and control over their revenues. So we are encouraging the legislature to seriously consider those proposals. They may want to make changes to them. For example, the governor would consolidate virtually all categorical programs into one mega categorical item. They may want to have 2 or 3. But I think the principle is the same. We think that a simplification, a process that gives school districts more control over revenues is a desirable thing. So we hope that they seriously consider those proposals. We also raise a point with regard to school funding in 1213 and the trigger reductions. It's clear that if the voters have a chance to vote on the governor's measure and approve it, school districts and other state programs will be better off in the future because there'll be more money. The minimum guarantee will be higher. But the situation is a little bit different for 1213, and that's because of the trigger reductions occur in November. And I think we're going to have a situation somewhat similar to that we had this year on the triggers, where school districts had to, in effect, budget for a worst-case scenario. That is, they had to kind of assume that, in the case of the current year, the triggers would operate, and therefore they had to plan for a program based on those lower revenue amounts. Well, that same situation could occur in 1213, where you have the governor proposing $4.9 billion in a reduction in the guarantee or in Prop 98 spending if the voters don't approve that. But the point is, districts have to plan for the worst case, so that even if voters do approve, they may have to start their years with the assumption that the monies are not going to be there. So the legislature faces a very difficult situation as to how they want to address the school's budget. Do they want to give them more certainty up front? What level would they select? So there are alternatives, but unfortunately no easy choices regarding those alternatives. Finally, let me just make a couple of comments about the Calworks child care proposal. This is the single biggest expenditure reduction proposal in the budget, and it's a very significant proposal that affects not only the amount of money that folks on Calworks assistance would receive, but also reduces the number of child care slots for low-income people. We think that the governor's approach has some merit. Clearly, it would help us in our work participation requirements that the federal government imposes on us. It would also bring some sort of coherence to our subsidized child care programs that are very complicated right now. On the other hand, this is obviously, the proposal would result in some significant reductions to the amount of monies that low-income Californians receive and the number of child care slots. So it's going to involve some very tough trade-offs for the legislature in balancing those concerns with the need to achieve some additional budgetary savings. I think with that, let me open it to any questions that I or my staff can respond to.